I just wanted to, I was kind of pondering the notion that Adventists are a cult, and I was just thinking about, well, it depends what your criteria is. Like Christianity is a cult, kind of. But let's consider like departing from the historical majority on doctrine. Okay, let's consider that like what would be culty, right? Like some weird heterodox. Is heterodox views usually not considered culty? So, excuse me. So let's see. What do Adventists believe? Let's think about this. Okay, Adventists believe the Ten Commandments are still binding, like every church in church history, including Protestants, Orthodox, and Catholics, say they're forever binding. So Adventists affirm that. So any group that doesn't affirm that, that calls Adventism a cult, seems kind of hypocritical. Adventists believe in, well, we do believe Jesus is Michael, but we believe it as Trinitarian. So if we're a cult for that, then so is like many or most of Protestant reformers and Calvin, Spurgeon, Gill, Wesley all believe that too. So if we're a cult for that reason, then like the fathers of Protestant movements all over are cults. That would mean the founders of basically all the American sects, Baptists, Calvinists, the originators of Calvinism, are all cults for the same reason. Unfortunately, the people that founded those doctrines and those confessions and things. So that doesn't really work. Okay, what about oh, I know. Once saved, always saved. Adventists like Wesleyans don't believe you can lose your salvation. They believe you can lose your salvation. Well, the church for the first 1600 years believed that. All the church, like Catholic, Orthodox, even the originators of like the philosophy of Calvinist sort of readings didn't or thought you could lose your salvation, like Augustine. So basically all of church history until Calvinists, modern Protestant Calvinists, once saved, always saved, or perseverance of the saints. So that can't really be something to call us a cult. That would be weird, right? Because then you'd be saying like the entire early church was a cult all the way for 1500 years. That doesn't make any sense. Let's see, what else do Adventists believe? Well, I guess the minority view on the Sabbath is kind of culty. But then are you going to call Messianic Jews in Israel a cult? Are you going to call the original church in Jerusalem a cult? Are you going to call following what Jesus taught a cult and what the early church was practicing a cult? That doesn't make sense. Let's see. Okay, what else? Eschatology, like well, what about eschatology? We're covenantal. So we basically have the same view as the early church on the Israel church distinction, although only we give a more ear to the original Jewishness of the church. So we're like, in a way, we're like even more accurate that way, like the original church. So that doesn't really work. We pretty much saw the one new covenant, people of God, the Gentiles are grafted into what's established in the first. That doesn't work. See, nobody agreed on eschatology as far as prophecy and second coming stuff, like the second coming. We're historic premillennialists, so basically all Protestantism originally agreed with us on that. So that's not culty. I know. Ellen White's health message is culty. So those little distinctive differences. Oh, crap. But that health message has been shown that people who follow it actually live longer and have happier lives and are able to minister more readily because of their health and length of lives. That doesn't work. I mean, I guess that could work. I guess if you're going to say we're a cult that lives healthier, longer lives, I mean, I'm not trying to brag. I haven't lived a healthy life, so I'm not talking about me. I'm sticking up for my people, but that's just like a scientific fact. So, I mean, if you want to diss that, I guess that's culty. Following the biblical principles of health and then proving it scientifically to make you live longer and minister better because you have a happier family life. I guess that's culty. I don't know. That doesn't really bother me though. Let's see what else is cult. I can't think of anything else. I guess we're a cult because because we were founded in 63. Is that a but that's like every Protestant movement. So why would it so let's see. This doesn't strike me as saying it's a cult to be very productive. I'm just saying, probably not productive. It's over. What's over, Richard? I don't know. I guess we're a cult because we agree with the original church. We do all the things that are original. We keep the Sabbath. That doesn't work. We don't believe in once saved, always saved. That doesn't work. I think the Lutherans believe the same thing as we do. They didn't think you can apostatize because that's just what the Bible teaches. The one that really kills me though is the 10 Commandments thing. Like every church, like everyone was like, you keep the 10 Commandments, so they just kind of messed up the Sabbath. But like in principle, like obviously because of the Sermon on the Mount, 10 Commandments are like binding. They define sin. Like that's what Luther said. Everybody said that. So and then regarding this, the man who, translated the Bible so that we would have it in the West, like Luther, when he translated it into German, his conclusion was the same view of death as Adventists have. And then when Tyndale translated it into English, he believed that as well and fought against the Catholics. So that doesn't really work. I guess if you want to say the hell doctrine, even though Chris Date's proven that it seems that the early church and scripture teaches conditional immortality. I mean, if you want to say that, I don't really mind being called a cult for believing the truth of scripture. It's like if you want to bitch about the Sabbath and the state of the dead and the nature of hell, and that makes me a cult, or like the health message that Ellen White gave, or the fruit of Ellen White's ministry and message. We have more hospitals and schools than any other church except for the Catholic Church, which is a monstrosity. So, I mean, or because we have a consistent view of eschatology that flows from Protestant understanding of covenant theology and the original church's understanding of what distinction there is between the church and Israel. And then we take a hermeneutical approach that's consistent. If the 490 day week, if the 70 weeks are years, why wouldn't the 2300 be years? And by the way, that was the historic majority of the interpretation of the evenings and mornings of the 2300. If you look that up, you can look at my videos to see that. People don't realize that. Oh, but they predicted it, right? The Millerites, which were a Baptist guys movement, thought the 2300 at the end of that was the end of the world. That was wrong. That's why we don't believe that. And that's why we don't make predictions for a second coming. Most Adventists constantly say, you can't make predictions. You can't do timeline things because, and then they'll quote Ellen White. But apparently some people think Ellen White made some prediction about 2030. That's just totally made up. I don't know if some group says that, but they're not supposed to say that. The Sunday law and Mark of the Beast prophecy seems unbiblical. Adventists didn't invent that. Do you want me to do a quick overview of why it's so obvious? It just is amazing. When you follow, I'll just give you a brief overview of why it absolutely makes perfect sense. I'm going to go quick. But Daniel, when you see the prophetic timeline from Daniel 2 to Daniel 7, and the way Paul uses it in 2 Thessalonians 2, and he invokes the little horn from Daniel 7 to be the final Antichrist before that Christ destroys at his coming, that figure is given attributes in Daniel 7. Every Protestant commentary agrees with this too. Just read all the commentaries, Calvinist and non-Calvinist commentaries of Protestants on 2 Thessalonians 2. The Catholic Church is the Antichrist because we have a prophetic timeline laid out, which actually from Daniel's day, Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and then Rome is that fourth kingdom. And then that gets modified. And then that figure from that modification is in 2 Thessalonians 2, according to all the Protestants. And people before them too, by the way, pointed to Rome. Why? Because Rome morphs into something, a woman who's a prostitute riding the beast. Now, if you're ecumenical with the Catholics, I'm not saying individuals are Antichrist. I'm saying the system of the church, which killed lots of people, and that's a direct violation of Jesus in Matthew 13. Killing heretics is not okay. You can't murder people because they have the wrong beliefs. That's Antichrist. That's a direct violation of what Jesus said. And so that's the church usurping Jesus' authority to disobey him. That's clearly false. So we don't murder people for having false beliefs. We believe in religious freedom. as Protestants. And I think other people agree with that too, that aren't Protestant, that are Christian. And so, but like, look, if you believe that Jesus is the Messiah, according to Daniel, which is what the New Testament is proving, essentially, if you understand the text, it's clear that they were showing that Jesus is the promised Messiah from Daniel. And then you follow that timeline, and the way Revelation continues that from Daniel 7 and Revelation 13 carefully. I recommend Stephen Bohr going over it carefully. That's just a common guy you could look up, but there's scholarship on this too. But so that timeline continues into the New Covenant period, and that's how Paul uses Daniel. And the little horn from Daniel 7 is described in Daniel 11. And there's a guy in Daniel 8 who's also called the little horn that is described in Daniel 11. So the figure in Daniel 11 that opposes God has attributes of the little horn from Daniel 7 and attributes of the little horn from Daniel 8. Look up the scholarship on it. Now, the figure in Daniel 11 is the figure in 2 Thessalonians 2 who Christ destroys at the brightness of his coming and the breath of his mouth. So if you say Daniel 8 is about Antiochus, Daniel 7 isn't talking about that, even though every scholar will tell you it's the same person in Daniel 8 as Daniel 11. And Daniel 11, you got to keep reading. There was no original chapter breaks. If you read Daniel 11, that final figure, and Michael will stand up, and there'll be a time of trouble. And then, since there never was since the beginning of a nation, and then many who sleep in the dust, it's the resurrection, which Jesus obviously talks about. The New Testament talks about, the book of Revelation talks about, which happens at the second coming of Jesus when he judges the earth, because he's declared himself the judge all throughout his ministry. And the New Testament writers all echo this. And so the woman riding the beast, the fourth beast, is Rome. Read Revelation 13. It's obvious, and compare it to Daniel 7. And so the woman in Scripture is God's people, and a harlot woman is God's people gone astray into false belief. And Daniel 7's figure is he seeks to change God's times and law. The Roman Catholic Church declares themselves to change that, the Sabbath. It's just a fact, okay? That's the only law of God, which is what Daniel 7 is talking about. The Antichrist is a woman riding the fourth beast. That's Rome. If you believe Jesus is the Messiah, the fourth beast is Rome, okay? Because he shows up during the fourth kingdom in a succession of kingdoms in Daniel. Now, that kingdom morphs. We know historically the things described happened with the 10 nations, and then they suppressed 2 of them, right? All that stuff. I don't have it in front of me. So the Catholic Church had civil power for 1,260 years exactly. And again, Daniel's 70 weeks are years, the 2,300 are years, and the 1,260 are years, because it describes, and then Paul says, the figure from Daniel 7 obviously stretches in the New Covenant period, because he's talking about that figure after Jesus is ascended, right? And he says that Jesus destroys that figure at his coming, the second coming, which is when the resurrection from the dead happens. So it's actually just obviously consistent. It doesn't make sense to do it any other way, or to understand it any other way, if you believe Jesus is the Messiah and that Daniel predicted it, which is what the New Testament was practically written to show. Now, when you get to Revelation 14 after Revelation 13, it describes the saints as keeping the commandments of God and having the testimony of Jesus, which is an adaptation from Isaiah 7 or 8. To the law and to the prophets, if they speak not according to this, there's no light in them. He who says he knows him and keeps not his commandments is a liar, and the truth is not in him. If you love me, keep my commandments. Now, do you believe Jesus is God? Do you believe he pre-existed? Do you believe he's one with the Father? Well, then he's not the little horn who changed the Sabbath. It's the Antichrist that opposes God, the lawless one, the man of sin who seeks to change God. That's an adaptation from Daniel 7. The lawless one, he speaks blasphemies against the Most High. What is blasphemy? According to the New Testament, it's declaring yourself God when you're not, which is another attribute in Daniel. He, sits in the temple of God, declaring himself to be God, like he speaks for God when he doesn't. Is there a figure that's a woman riding Rome that is an apostate church that says it has its mark of authority is changing the solemnity of Saturday to Sunday, and it's a mark of her authority, and then does it not call the Antichrist the lawless one who seeks to change God's times and law? There's only one law that has to do with time. There's only one Roman harlot woman that developed after Jesus came into the New Covenant that claims to have to speak for Jesus and to be able to forgive sins, which is what blasphemy is defined as in the New Testament. I mean, If that's not it, then the Bible's not true. I mean, and it's like, what does it say? Fear God and give glory to him, for the hour of his judgment has come. Worship him who? Who made the heavens, the earth, the sea, and the fountains of water. What does that sound like? What does that sound like? That's the creator. Worship the creator, who is Jesus according to the New Testament. Now, I'm just saying, he changes God's times and laws. He's a woman riding the beast. He killed people for being heretics, which is against what Jesus said. The fourth beast is Rome if you believe Jesus is the Messiah. Is there a false woman who morphed out of the Roman state and killed people for being heretics and said she changed God's law? That has to do with time because she has the mark of her authority because she says she speaks for God. Yes, there is. I'm sorry. That's just facts, man. And then the New Testament says Jesus is coming back. Fear God and worship him. And it says worship God. Worship the creator, which the creator in creation rests on the Sabbath. And then it practically spells it out for you without saying it. Now, last thing I'll say. I mean, there's much more I could say. Okay. Now, I actually think the Bible is predictive. The prophecy is true. It's not a shot in the dark, just crazy made up stuff. It actually verifies that Jesus is a Messiah, and it continues on, and the New Testament writers use it a certain way. You know, people don't know this because they don't look at it carefully and they don't consider it. But it's like, I actually believe the Bible because it's demonstratably true historically and prophetically. And if you take a consistent approach to that, and say, like, right now, I'm just talking about historically stuff that's behind us. That's just a continuation of what proved Jesus is the Messiah in the first place. There's just so many people that have, but like when you look at what people said, certain flags posted, like the Daniel 9:27 is obviously about Jesus. The New Testament writers are obviously seeking to prove that in Galatians, in the book of Hebrews, the book of Thessalonians, Jesus' use of Daniel. Okay. So for Richard, I just wanted to show you this. So it sucks because it's like people won't listen. Everybody says it's a cult. Most of our beliefs line up in large part with things that were largely agreed across many churches. Let's see. The first person to say the mark of the beast was the Sabbath from a good Bible study. Or let's see. Look, you don't have to believe it. I understand that that's a hard thing to swallow. I'm just saying it's not insane. There's many, 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 many hints. It doesn't explicitly say it. I don't think you have to believe it or anything. I just think it makes so much sense. It's so obvious. There's so many reasons why it's obvious. Or it's like one of those things. It's like, look, the Bible doesn't say that Michael and Jesus are the same person. So like, I can't say that. I admit that. But it's like there's so many hints and reasons to believe that. But I would never say like it's something to be dogmatically accepted. It's just like, if you're going to say I'm a heretic for believing Jesus is Michael, look, like I said, it's not explicit in the text. But you know what else isn't explicit in the text? That dead people are alive. And there's actually texts that explicitly in context tell you that dead people are not alive in any sense. But people will still argue for that, like it's heresy to not believe. But I would actually say explicitly not possible in the text. Only bad readings can let you imply that dead people are alive. But of course, a lot is attached to that. In a lot of churches historically, like they're never going to give that up, even though the Bible clearly doesn't allow it, because it explicitly in context when talking about the nature of death says that dead people aren't alive. There's nothing to suggest otherwise except for tradition. And I that's sucks, I guess, but let's see. I can't find it. Let's see. I had it somewhere. Again, like I said, it's not explicit in the text. I can't say that you have to believe that. Obviously, would be stupid. Let's see. I don't know. Some guy in the 1600s pointed the same thing out. In the 1850 years of church history. Well, the original Adventists they weren't even Sabbath keepers. So it was actually a Seventh-day Baptist, Rachel Oakes, who convinced them at a tent revival meeting. No, I don't think we should use the Jewish calendar. No. So my view on that is that this is why I tell people I actually do think October 22 in 1844 was the Day of Atonement, but it doesn't even matter. So I've told this to people who try to prove this wrong, like Chris Lucas he's funny. So it's like, first of all, you can't prove for certain because the Jewish calendar isn't something, I don't think it was preserved in the early church or necessary. You don't see that anywhere historically. So like, we can't be for sure what's the right way to mark the day. Do you do it from Jerusalem? It's like there's no one established sighting the moon in Jerusalem in the early church is something we needed to do. And so I would say, if people want to keep the holy days and stuff, that's cool, man, whatever. It's just like, I think that was a geographically isolated area when God's people were generally in that area in the Old Covenant. It was never meant to be worldwide, in my opinion. Doesn't make sense to me. So Adventists don't keep the Hebrew calendar. They used it to figure out when the date would be for October 22. And I actually think it's probably right. But there's discrepancy, and there's a lot of people out there that'll tell you they know exact dates, but it's not, they don't understand all the data on like what they have. Scholarship has like a correlation with our Gregorian calendar going back, but there's a few things regarding the sighting of the moon, when they added certain months and what we know and don't know for sure, that don't make it certain things actually possible. Just like people who say they can, like, what day of the week did Jesus die on, and what year was it? I'm not being able to find the right words very well. There's things we don't know that leave it so we can't line up the days of the week for certain. And so I just leave it at that. Like, so some people say, no, we know it was Wednesday on this year. I don't think you can prove that. Depends on how they sighted the moon, and we don't know for sure. I think you can make a case for different ideas there, but it's never, we know everything that's possible to know about it from my looking over all the stuff. And a lot of people make a lot of claims on this that aren't right. And you can read I've read the Jewish sources and all different people talking about this. Anyway, let's see. Amillennial. Yeah, I get it. Like, it's interesting. Amillennial is like, it's funny because Adventists are historic premillennial, but we don't believe in a millennium on Earth. So in that sense, we're going to use the text about the second coming and the execution of, hi Josh. Yeah, the COVID thing's freaky, and same, this drone thing's freaky too. They can like shoot people with drones now. It's pretty scary. So what's interesting is amillennialism is the Adventist view of premillennialism. Our premillennial view is more aligned with amillennial by far than any other premillennial view, whether it be post-trib, mid-trib, all that stuff, historical premillennialism. And that's a really interesting thing too, because the main issue for me that I agree with, it's a weird overlap. So I'm going to I think Revelation 20 destroys amillennialism because it gives details that correlate with things that are taught in like 1 Thessalonians 4 and what things that Jesus said that require, like, what would be like Revelation 20 would be just like this boon of bad information. It's like, it's with 1 Corinthians 15 things about the resurrection. It correlates things. It's compatible with things that Jesus said that are kind of like, are you a splitter or a joiner? They say, like, of the two resurrections 1,000 years apart, or do they happen at the same time? Many texts kind of sound like everybody's resurrected at the same time. Many who sleep in the dead shall awake, right? But that actually is, it's not clear. It's just like everybody will be resurrected in those texts. It kind of sounds like it's one event. And I would argue this, it kind of is one event, because I would say it like this. When Jesus returns, fates are sealed. And that's where I'm getting, so in a way, it's like, you better be saved when Jesus returns, because everybody's fates are sealed. And I can prove that really easily. Nobody wants, but so many people, it just breaks so many theologies. But on that fact, I'm going to agree with the amillennialists. Like, even though I think there's a resurrection after the 1,000 years for the lost, that's where they're destroyed in hell. But when Jesus returns, it says when he comes back, he sends forth his angels, and that's when he resurrects the dead and he judges those who worship the beast. But I would still say that they're not finally destroyed in hell and facing the great white throne judgment until the end of the 1,000 years. But the lost are killed when Jesus comes at the beginning of the millennium. And see, that's where all millennials, I'm going to agree with all millennials. It's all these people saying there's going to be a millennial kingdom on earth that I think gets stuff messed up, which is what all the other premillennialists believe besides Adventists. And that's why I say in that way, we agree with the amillennialists and the historic premillennialists regarding like when because there's so many texts, right? He's like, you better be ready when I come. It says, let him who is filthy be filthy still. Let him who is just righteous be righteous still. And behold, I am coming quickly, and my reward is with me to give to every man. So the judgment is executed at Jesus' arrival for the saved and the lost, and that's it. And there is no kingdom on earth, right? That's what we would say, like the amillennialists would say. And so in that way, we agree, even though we're premillennial, so it's weird. But you can just show that. If I was wanting to show that there's no millennial on earth, it's very simple. You just go to Revelation 13:8, because you know what it says? You got to look at 2 Thessalonians 2, what Paul says, Jesus destroys the Antichrist, and look at the scholarship. He's obviously talking about the figure in Daniel 7, at least. I think it's the same figure as Daniel 8, but everybody will agree it's Daniel 7. And then Revelation 13:8 says that figure, and you can correlate Daniel 7 with Revelation 13, and it talks about that same person. And that's the one Jesus destroys when he comes. And you can correlate many texts to prove that. But it says, to that figure who Christ destroys with the breath of his mouth and the brightness of his coming, in Revelation 13:8, it's very plain. It says, and the Antichrist has power over every tribe, tongue, and nation. All who dwell on the earth worship the beast, whose names aren't found written in the Lamb's book of life from the foundation of the world. So everybody across the whole world, according to Revelation 13:8, worships the beast. So it just says everybody around the world worships the beast, except for those written in the Lamb's book of life from the foundation of the world. Now, who's left? And what is it? And then you can go to the other texts that say, everyone who worships the beast, like it's explicit. Some people have tried to like mess this up, but it's like everyone historically knows, if you worship the beast, you're thrown into the lake of fire. You're lost. And not to mention the text I said about Jesus. Before Jesus comes swiftly back to the earth, according to red letter words at the end of the book, Revelation 21, he says, he who is filthy, let him be filthy still. He who is just, so Jesus says, the judgment is decided. Jesus knows who's saved and who's lost. And then he comes and he gives to every man according to his work. So anybody who says there's like some magical millennial where people are born and people are getting saved after Jesus returns, that's false. Jesus returns to judge the quick and the dead. So any view that defies that is just defying the teaching of Jesus' ministry, right? He was telling me, I'm the judge. I'm coming back. You better be ready. Let whom is on the rooftop not go back down. Don't say I'm going to drink with the drunkards and say my master delayeth his coming, or I'll cut you up with the hypocrites. If you say my master delays his coming. Peter says, they'll say delayeth his coming since the fathers fell asleep. Well, they'll be screwed because they deny that Jesus is coming back. That's Jesus said, be ready. So you know not the day your master comes. That's when Jesus next comes. There's a million texts. Jesus warned him every time. What does he do? When he comes back in his glory with all his angels, he sends forth his angels and they gather everything that causes offense and practices lawlessness. And they're gathered into the barn to be burned. Or read the end of Matthew 25. When Christ comes in his glory with his holy angels, he separates the sheep and the goats. You just can't get around it. There's a million texts. It's obvious. So anyway, God bless. See you guys later.